The individuality and personal life is preserved forever. The fact of life in whatever form means the continuance of life, even though the form be changed. Life is the one eternal principle of the universe, and so always continues, even though the form of the agency through which it manifests be changed. In my Father's house are many mansions. And surely, because the individual has dropped, has gone out of the physical body, there is no evidence at all that the life does not go right on the same as before, not commencing, for there is no cessation, but commencing in the other form, exactly where it has left off here. For all life is a continuous evolution, step by step. There one neither skips nor jumps. There are in the other form, then, mentalities and hence lives of all grades and influences, the same as there are in the physical form. If, then, the great law that like attracts like is ever operating, we are continually attracting to us from this side of life influences and conditions most akin to those of our own thoughts and lives. A gruesome thought that we should be so influenced, says one. By no means, all life is one. We are all bound together in the one common and universal life, and especially not when we take into consideration the fact that we have it entirely in our own hands to determine the order of thought we entertain, and consequently the order of influences we attract, and are not mere willowy creatures of circumstance, unless, indeed, we choose to be. In our mental lives we can either keep hold of the rudder and so determine exactly what course we take, what points we touch, or we can fail to do this, and failing, we drift, and are blown hither and thither by every passing breeze. And so, on the contrary, welcome should be the thought, for thus we may draw to us the influence and the aid of the greatest, the noblest, and the best who have lived on the earth, whatever the time, wherever the place. We cannot rationally believe other than that those who have labored in love and with uplifting power here are still laboring in the same way, and in all probability with more earnest zeal and with still greater power. And Elisha prayed, and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire around about Elisha. While riding with a friend a few days ago, we were speaking of the great interest people are everywhere in taking in the more vital things of life, the eagerness with which they are reaching out for a knowledge of the interior forces, their ever-increasing desire to know themselves and to know their true relations with the Infinite. And in speaking of the great spiritual awakening that is so rapidly coming all over the world, the beginnings of which are so clearly seen during the closing years of this, and whose ever-increasing proportions we are to witness during the early years of the coming century, I said, how beautiful if Emerson, the illumined one so far in advance of his time, who labored so faithfully and so fearlessly to bring about these very conditions, how beautiful if he were with us today to witness it all! How he would rejoice! How do we know, was the reply, that he is not witnessing it all, and more, that he is not having a hand in it all, a hand even greater perhaps than when we saw him here? Thank you, my friend, for this reminder. And truly, are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister to those who shall be heirs of salvation? As science is so abundantly demonstrating today, the things that we see are but a very small fraction of the things that are. The real vital forces at work in our own lives and in the world about us are not seen by the ordinary physical eye. Yet they are the causes of which all things we see are merely the effects. Thoughts are forces. Like builds like, and like attracts like. For one to govern his thinking, then, is to determine his life. Says one of deep insight into the nature of things, the law of correspondences between spiritual and material things is wonderfully exact in its workings. People ruled by the mood of gloom attract to them gloomy things. People always discouraged and despondent do not succeed in anything, and live only by burdening someone else. The hopeful, confident, and cheerful attract the elements of success. A man's front or backyard will advertise that man's ruling mood in a way it is kept. A woman at home shows her state of mind in her dress. A slattern advertises the ruling mood of hopelessness, carelessness, and lack of system. Rags, tatters, and dirt are always in the mind before being on the body. The thought that is most put out brings its corresponding visible element to crystallize about you as surely and literally as the visible bit of copper in solution attracts to it the invisible copper in that solution. A mind always hopeful, confident, courageous, and determined on its set purpose, and keeping itself to that purpose, attracts to itself out of the elements things and powers favorable to that purpose. Every thought of yours has a literal value to you in every possible way. The strength of your body, the strength of your mind, your success in business, and the pleasure your company brings others, depends on the nature of your thoughts. In whatever mood you set your mind does your spirit receive of unseen substance in correspondence with that mood. It is as much a chemical law as spiritual law. Chemistry is not confined to the elements we see. The elements we do not see with the physical eye outnumber 10,000 times to those we do see. The Christ injunction, "Do good to those who hate you," is based on a scientific fact and a natural law. So, to do good is to bring to yourself all the elements in nature of power and good. To do evil is to bring the contrary destructive elements. When our eyes are opened, self-preservation will make us stop all evil thought. Those who live by hate will die by hate. That is, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. Every evil thought is as a sword drawn on the person to whom it is directed. If a sword is drawn in return, so much the worse for both. And says another, who knows full well whereof he speaks, "The law of attraction works universally on every plane of action, and we attract whatever we desire or expect. If we desire one thing and expect another, we become like houses divided against themselves, which are quickly brought to desolation. Determine resolutely to expect only what you desire. Then you will attract only what you wish for. Carry any kind of thought you please about with you, and so long as you retain it, no matter how you roam over land or sea, you will unceasingly attract to yourself, knowingly or inadvertently, exactly and only what corresponds to your own dominant quality of thought. Thoughts are our private property, and we can regulate them to suit our taste entirely by steadily recognizing our ability so to do." We have just spoken of the drawing power of the mind. Faith is nothing more or less than the operation of the thought forces in the form of an earnest desire, coupled with expectation as to its fulfillment. And in the degree of that faith, the earnest desire thus sent out is continually held to and watered by firm expectation. In just that degree does it either draw to itself, or does it change from the unseen into the visible, from the spiritual into the material, that for which it is sent. Let the element of doubt or fear enter in, and what would otherwise be a tremendous force will be so neutralized that it will fail of its own realization. Continually held to and continually watered by firm expectation, it becomes a force, a drawing power that is irresistible and absolute, and the results will be absolute in direct proportion as to its absolute. We shall find, as we are so rapidly beginning to find today, that the great things said in regard to faith, the great promises made in connection with it, are not mere vague sentimentalities, but are all great scientific facts, and rest upon great immutable laws. Even in our very laboratory experiments we are beginning to discover the laws underlying and governing these forces. We are now beginning, some at least, to use them understandingly and not blindly, as has so often and so long been the case. Much is said today in regard to the will. It is many times spoken of as if it were a force in itself. But will is a force, a power, only in so far as it is a particular form of the manifestation of the thought forces. For it is by what we call the will that thought is focused and given a particular direction, and in the degree that thought is thus focused and given direction, it is effective in the work it is sent out to accomplish. In a sense there are two kinds of will. the human, and the divine. The human will is the will of what, for convenience sake, we may term the lower self. It is the will that finds its life merely in the realm of the mental and the physical, the sense will. It is the will of one who is not yet awake to the fact that there is a life that far transcends the life of merely the intellect and the physical senses, and which, when realized and lived, does not do away with or minify these, but which, on the contrary, brings them to their highest perfection and to their powers of keenest enjoyment. The divine will is the will of the higher self, the will of the one who recognizes his oneness with the divine, and who consequently brings his will to work in harmony, in conjunction with the divine will. The Lord thy God in the midst of thee is mighty. The human will has its limitations. So far and no farther, says the law. The divine will has no limitations. It is supreme. All things are open and subject to you, says the law. And so in the degree that the human will is transmuted into the divine, in the degree that it comes into harmony with and so acts in conjunction with the divine, does it become supreme. Then it is that thou shalt decree a thing, and it shall be established unto thee. The great secret of life and of power, then, is to make and to keep one's conscious connection with this infinite source. The power of everyday life, the very life itself, is determined by what it relates itself to. God is immanent as well as transcendent. He is creating, working, ruling in the universe today, in your life and in mine, just as much as He ever has been. We are too apt to regard Him after the manner of an absentee landlord, one who has set into operation the forces of this great universe and then taken himself away. In the degree, however, that we recognize Him as immanent as well as transcendent, are we able to partake of His life and power. For in the degree that we recognize Him as the infinite spirit of life and power that is today, at this very moment, working and manifesting in and through all, and then, in the degree that we come into the realization of our oneness with this life, do we become partakers of, and so do we actualize in ourselves the quality of His life. In the degree that we open ourselves to the inflowing tide of this eminent and transcendent life, do we make ourselves channels through which the infinite intelligence and power can work. It is through the instrumentality of the mind that we are enabled to connect the real soul life with the physical life, and so enable the soul life to manifest and work through the physical. The thought life needs continually to be illumined from within. This illumination can come in just the degree that through the agency of the mind we recognize our oneness with the divine, of which each soul is an individual form of expression. This gives us the inner guiding which we call intuition. Intuition is to the spiritual nature and understanding practically what sense perception is to the sensuous nature and understanding. It is an inner spiritual sense, through which man is open to the direct revelation and knowledge of God, the secrets of nature and life, and through which he is brought into conscious unity and fellowship with God, and made to realize his own deific nature and supremacy of being as the Son of God. Spiritual supremacy and illumination thus realized through the development and perfection of intuition under divine inspiration gives the perfect inner vision and direct insight into the character, properties, and purpose of all things to which the attention and interest are directed. It is, we repeat, a spiritual sense opening inwardly, as the physical senses open outwardly, and because it has the capacity to perceive, grasp, and know the truth at first hand, independent of all external sources of information, we call it intuition. All inspired teaching and spiritual revelations are based upon the recognition of this spiritual faculty of the soul, and its power to receive and appropriate them. Conscious unity of man in spirit and purpose with the Father, born out of his supreme desire and trust, opens his soul through this inner sense to immediate inspiration and enlightenment from the divine omniscience and the cooperative energy of the divine omnipotence, under which he becomes a seer and a master. On this higher plane of realized spiritual life in the flesh the mind holds the impersonal attitude and acts with unfettered freedom and unbiased vision, grasping the truth at first hand, independent of all external sources of information, approaching all beings and things from the divine side. They are seen in the light of the divine omniscience, God's purpose in them, and so the truth concerning them, as it rests in the mind of God, are thus revealed by direct illumination from the divine mind, to which the soul is opened inwardly through the spiritual sense we call intuition. Some call it the voice of the soul. Some call it the voice of God. Some call it the sixth sense. It is our inner spiritual sense. In the degree that we come into the recognition of our own true selves, into the realization of the oneness of our life with the infinite life, and in the degree that we open ourselves to this divine inflow, does this voice of intuition, this voice of the soul, this voice of God, speak clearly. And in the degree that we recognize, listen to, and obey it, does it speak ever more clearly, until, by and by, there comes a time when it is unerring, absolutely unerring, in its guidance. End of section 3. Section 4 of In Tune with the Infinite by Ralph Waldo Trine. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Fullness of life, bodily health and vigor. God is the Spirit of infinite life. If we are partakers of this life, and have the power of opening ourselves fully to its divine flow, it means more, so far as even the physical life is concerned, than we may at first think. For very clearly, the life of this infinite Spirit, from its very nature, can admit of no disease. And if this is true, no disease can exist in the body where it freely enters, through which it freely flows. Let us recognize at the outset that, so far as the physical life is concerned, all life is from within out. There is an immutable law which says, "As within, so without," cause, effect. In other words, the thought forces, the various mental states and the emotions, all have in time their effects upon the physical body. Someone says, "I hear a great deal said today in regard to the effects of the mind upon the body, but I don't know as I place very much confidence in this." Don't you? Someone brings you sudden news. You grow pale, you tremble, or perhaps you fall into a faint. It is, however, through the channel of your mind that the news is imparted to you. A friend says something to you, perhaps at the table, something that seems very unkind. You are hurt by it, as we say. You have been enjoying your dinner, but from this moment your appetite is gone. But what was said entered into and affected you through the channel of your mind. Look! Yonder goes a young man, dragging his feet, stumbling over the slightest obstruction in the path. Why is it? Simply that he is weak-minded, an idiot. In other words, a falling state of mind is productive of a falling condition of the body. To be sure-minded is to be sure-footed. To be uncertain in mind is to be uncertain in step. Again, a sudden emergency arises. You stand trembling and weak with fear. Why are you powerless to move? Why do you tremble? And yet you believe that the mind has but little influence upon the body. You are for a moment dominated by a fit of anger. For a few hours afterwards you complain of a violent headache. And still you do not seem to realize that the thoughts and emotions have an effect upon the body. A day or two ago, while conversing with a friend, we were speaking of worry. "My father is greatly given to worry," he said. "Your father is not a healthy man," I said. "He is not strong, vigorous, robust, and active." I then went on to describe to him more fully his father's condition and the troubles which afflicted him. He looked at me in surprise and said, "Why, you do not know my father?" "No," I replied. "How then can you describe so accurately the disease with which he is afflicted?" "You have just told me that your father is greatly given to worry. When you told me this, you indicated to me cause. In describing your father's condition, I simply connected with the cause its own peculiar effects." Fear and worry have the effect of closing up the channels of the body, so that the life forces flow in a slow and sluggish manner. Hope and tranquility open the channels of the body, so that the life forces go bounding through it in such a way that disease can rarely get a foothold. Not long ago a lady was telling a friend of a serious physical trouble. My friend happened to know that between this lady and her sister the most kindly relations did not exist. He listened attentively to her delineation of her troubles, and then, looking her squarely in the face, in a firm but kindly tone said, "Forgive your sister." The woman looked at him in surprise and said, "I can't forgive my sister." "Very well then," he replied. "Keep the stiffness of your joints and your kindred rheumatic troubles." A few weeks later he saw her again. With a light step she came toward him and said, "I took your advice. I saw my sister and forgave her. We have become good friends again, and I don't know how it is, but somehow or other from the very day, as I remember that we became reconciled, my troubles seem to grow less, and today there is not a trace of the old difficulties left. And really, my sister and I have become such good friends that now we can scarcely get along without one another." Again, we have effect following cause. We have several well authenticated cases of the following nature. A mother has been dominated for a few moments by an intense passion of anger, and the child at her breast has died within an hour's time. So poisoned became the mother's milk by virtue of the poisonous secretions of the system while under the domination of this fit of anger. In other cases it has caused severe illness and convulsions. The following experiment has been tried a number of times by a well-known scientist. Several men have been put into a heated room. Each man has been dominated for a moment by a particular passion of some kind, one by an intense passion of anger, and others by different other passions. The experimenter has taken a drop of perspiration from the body of each of these men, and by means of a careful chemical analysis he has been able to determine the particular passion by which each has been dominated. Practically the same results revealed themselves in the chemical analysis of the saliva of each of the men. Says a noted American author, an able graduate of one of our greatest medical schools, and one who has studied deeply into the forces that build the body and the forces that tear it down, "The mind is the natural protector of the body. Every thought tends to reproduce itself, and ghastly mental pictures of disease, sensuality, and vice of all sorts produce scrofula and leprosy in the soul, which reproduces them in the body. Anger changes the chemical properties of the saliva to a poison dangerous to life. It is well known that sudden and violent emotions have not only weakened the heart in a few hours, but have caused death and insanity. It has been discovered by scientists that there is a chemical difference between that sudden cold exudation of a person under a deep sense of guilt and the ordinary perspiration. And the state of the mind can sometimes be determined by chemical analysis of the perspiration of a criminal, which, when brought into contact with selenic acid, produces a distinctive pink color. It is well known that fear has killed thousands of victims, while, on the other hand, courage is a great invigorator. Anger in the mother may poison a nursing child. Rarely, the celebrated horse tamer said that an angry word would sometimes raise the pulse of a horse 10 beats in a minute. If this is true of a beast, what can we say of its power upon human beings, especially upon a child? Strong emotion often causes vomiting. Extreme anger or fright may produce jaundice. A violent paroxysm of rage has caused apoplexy and death. Indeed, in more than one instance, a single night of mental agony has wrecked a life. Grief, long-standing jealousy, constant care and corroding anxiety sometimes tend to develop insanity. Sick thoughts and discordant moods are in the natural atmosphere of disease, and crime is engendered and thrives in the miasma of the mind. From all this we get the great fact we are scientifically demonstrating today, that the various mental states, emotions, and passions have their various peculiar effects upon the body, and each induces in turn, if indulged in to any great extent, its own peculiar forms of disease, and these in time become chronic. Just a word or two in regard to their mode of operation. If a person is dominated for a moment by, say, a passion of anger, there is set upon the physical organism what we might justly term a bodily thunderstorm, which has the effect of souring, or rather of corroding the normal, healthy, and life-giving secretions of the body, so that instead of performing their natural functions, they become poisonous and destructive. And if this goes on to any great extent, by virtue of their cumulative influences, they give rise to a particular form of disease, which in turn becomes chronic. So the emotion opposite to this, that of kindness, love, benevolence, goodwill, tends to stimulate a healthy, purifying, and life-giving flow of all bodily secretions. All the channels of the body seem free and open. The life forces go bounding through them, and these very forces, set into abounding activity, will in time counteract the poisonous and disease-giving effects of their opposites. A physician goes to see a patient. He gives no medicine this morning, yet the very fact of his going makes the patient better. He has carried with him the spirit of health. He has carried brightness of tone and disposition. He has carried hope into the sick chamber where he has left it there. In fact, the very hope and good cheer he has carried with him has taken hold of and has had a subtle but powerful influence upon the mind of the patient, and this mental condition imparted by the physician has in turn its effects upon the patient's body. And so through the instrumentality of this mental suggestion the healing goes on. Know then, whatever cheerful and serene supports the mind, supports the body too. Hence, the most vital movement mortals feel is hope, the balm and lifeblood of the soul. We sometimes hear a person in weak health say to another, "I always feel better when you come." There is a scientific reason underlying the statement. The tongue of the wise is health. The power of suggestion, so far as the human mind is concerned, is a most wonderful and interesting field of study. Most wonderful and powerful forces can be set into operation through this agency. One of the world's most noted scientists, recognized everywhere as one of the most eminent anatomists living, tells us that he has proven from laboratory experiments that the entire human structure can be completely changed, made over, within a period of less than 1 year, and that some portions can be entirely remade within a period of a very few weeks. "Do you mean to say," I hear it asked, "that the body can be changed from a diseased to a healthy condition through the operation of the interior forces?" Most certainly, and more. This is the natural method of cure. The method that has as its work the application of drugs, medicines, and external agencies is the artificial method. The only thing that any drug or medicine can do is to remove obstructions, that the life forces may have simply a better chance to do their work. The real healing process must be performed by the operation of the life forces within. A surgeon and physician of world-wide fame recently made to his medical associates the following declaration: "For generations past the most important influence that plays upon nutrition, the life principle itself, has remained an unconsidered element in the medical profession, and almost exclusive drift of its studies and remedial paraphernalia has been confined to the action of matter over mind. This has seriously interfered with the evolutionary tendencies of the doctors themselves, and consequently the psychic factor in professional life is still in a rudimentary or comparatively undeveloped state. But the light of the 19th century has dawned, and so the march of mankind in general is taken in the direction of the hidden forces of nature. Doctors